بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. Welcome everybody to this special event, which we're calling the Zakah QA. We're trying to keep it really simple and clear what exactly this event is. And we're doing this with our good friends at Islamic Relief USA, specifically their WAQF branch, because Islamic Relief, it does have a Zakah. They receive people's zakah, and they have an interest in the subject matter of zakah. So I want to introduce my co-host, which, if any of you are from New Jersey, if any of you have gone to Hajj with Dar es Salaam, you know this gentleman very well. He's an old friend from childhood, actually. And alhamdulillah, we just grown up 20 years and 30 years, getting old together. His name is Sami Sha'ban. So let's put Sami Sha'ban up. And Sami Sha'ban is the Islamic Relief WAQF representative. So if you have any questions on what Islamic Relief does with the zakah money and how they handle it, they have scholars. They make sure the zakah goes to its recipients. So you should not worry about that. And Safina Society, we're on the side of knowledge. We're interested in, we don't accept zakah, but we're interested in transmitting and educating everyone on the where zakah goes, what you pay it on, what you have to pay it on, what you don't have to pay it on, etc., etc. And with that, we're bringing a specialist. But before we introduce our specialists and our guest, Sheikh, today, I want to turn over to Sami Sha'ban. So if you want to tell us anything about Islamic Relief, WAQF, and all about that angle of the organization. Bismillah.
Inshallah, jazakallah khair, Sheikh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. May Allah bless this gathering and let it be a means for us to fulfill one of the core obligations of Muslims in the Ummah, which is fulfilling the rights on our money and on zakat. And Islamic Relief has been an organization that many people know for over 25 years. And in the past 5 years, we've launched the endowment, the WAQF, in which we are now taking funds and investing them, and so that in the future, we can use the investment proceeds to then fund more projects. And so think of it almost like when you give directly to the recipient, you're giving them the apple from the tree. But when you give to the WAQF for an endowment, you're planting a seed that will grow a tree that will yield many, many apples into the future for those same recipients, inshallah. And so we've launched it about 5 years ago, and alhamdulillah, it's growing, and there'll be a short video on it later, but I'll pause there, inshallah, and let's kick it off, Sheikh. Right back to you.
All right, wonderful. So anytime that we have at Safina Society money matters that we want to ask, we go to our main man, who is Sheikh Taha Abdul-Basser. Sheikh Taha, we know him. He's been on the podcast. He's come to NBIC. He's studied traditionally with Islamic scholars abroad in Yemen, in many different countries. He's also completed a PhD on the topic at Harvard University. He graduated from there. He's basically Harvard through and through. And so that tells you about his academic credentials as well. He works in the field of Islamic finance. So he's somebody who is Ahl al-Dhikr in that sense. He's always working on Islamic finance related matters. So without any further delay, let's introduce Sheikh Taha. And right away, right off the bat, we already have questions coming in. So Sami, inshallah, you got the first question. So welcome to the program, Sheikh Taha.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. May Allah Azza wa Jalla accept.
Ameen, ameen.
Inshallah. So Bismillah, Sheikh. We're gonna hit you right up. This is no rest for the weary, but this is a very relevant topic. Over the past year, cryptocurrency has really become very popular. And so there's a question around cryptocurrency. What do I have to pay in zakat on my cryptocurrency? Does it depend how long I hold it for? And does it depend on my intention when I'm investing it?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So yes, zakat is due on cryptocurrency, such as Bitcoin, that one has acquired. Essentially, one treats it as trade inventory and adds its value on the day that zakat is due to the other gold, silver, cash and cash equivalents that one has and pays the corresponding zakat 2.5%, 1/40th on that aggregate amount. Wallahu a'lam.
All right. That's a good start, Sammy, and thank you for that question. And I'm going to give a follow-up. Can you please specify the separation of if somebody is keeping a stock such as or cryptocurrency and treating it like a stock that is for almost long-term versus that they trade with that daily? Could you specify if there is a separation, and how do we determine what are we holding for long-term or are we short-term? Is there something that separates that?
Yeah, for crypto currency, for crypto such as Bitcoin, the treatment which is precautionary and which seems soundest is that it be treated as trade inventory, i.e. something acquired at the time of acquisition with the intention of selling it, so that there is not the distinction that you mentioned between holding it for the long term or the short term.
Okay, so we're going to treat it, and this is what they call the mudir, or the someone who is constantly trading something. He pays it zakat on it once a year on his inventory, 2.5%.
Yes.
Okay. All right, Sammy, you're up. There's a question, looks like here.
Yeah, so thank you, Abu Dhar. Says, Salamu alaikum. How does one calculate on a 401k pot? Do I take the face value minus applicable taxes or penalty, or is there an equivalent formula that's accepted? And please continue to drop your questions into the chat so we can get to them, inshallah.
So zakat is due on 401k, 403b, and other retirement funds in general. One calculates zakat by adding the amount of zakat, the amount of funds in the 401k to the other cash that one has, and 2.5% on the entire amount. Now, as for the time of payment, if one has resolve, then the precautionary approach is that it be paid every year. If one lacks the resolve to do so, or otherwise finds it quite difficult, then one can pay it at the time of access to the retirement funds. There's a diversity of opinion as to whether at the time one accesses the funds, one pays it once or pays it for subsequent for the intervening years.
Okay, great. And we have a question from Ramiz. Ramiz, who I think I might know from Tom's River. He says, business assets. I'm a co-founder of a company with cash in the bank, working capital, accounts receivable plus payables from ongoing operations. Is this zakatable? The cash plus the receivables minus the payables?
Yes, in essence, the formula that has been mentioned is correct. A business is a partnership. Zakat is due on funds in a partnership. The zakat may be paid on the level of the partnership, the business, meaning by the business itself, on behalf of the shareholders, or it may be paid by each one of the shareholders, in which case it is essentially that shareholder's fraction of ownership times the entire zakat that would be due on the business. And as was mentioned in the question, the zakat basis would be cash equivalent, accounts receivable short term, and accounts payable subtracted therefrom, those that are immediately due.
So just as a clarification, if a person owns a business, we don't have a separation that the business is a separate entity. If you own the business, that is your money, essentially, and you owe zakat upon it.
an important difference that applies here and applies in other masail that's useful to understand is the difference between the recognition of legal entities, entities that are recognized as distinct entities per a legal system, such as the American legal systems, and things that have a Sharia recognized distinct liability basis. Human beings have a liability basis, i.e., rights may be attached to them and obligations can be due from them. Just because a legal entity exists does not mean that the obligation to discharge liabilities that adheres to the person originally has moved from the person to that legal entity. In the case of a business, a company is recognized as a form of Sharia recognized partnership, and the issue of payment of zakat on mixed assets in a partnership is a known issue that has been treated for some time. It's treated as we just mentioned.
Okay, excellent. Sammy, you're up.
Yeah, so referring back to the crypto question, Hamza Qureshi, shout out to Hamza, is asking if the zakat that's payable is due with the fluctuation of cryptocurrency is due at the time of the investment, or when should that amount be determined, that 2.5%?
Zakat for the crypto is due at the time of the due date for the gold and silver and cash the one has that it is due. So whenever one's zakat date is, on that date, one aggregates sums, one's gold, silver, and cash, and cryptocurrency, and pays 2.5% on it.
Okay, good. Next up, we have Omar Awan, who may or may not be related to our very own Suhaib Awan, who everyone knows inside the Safina Society. He says, Assalamu alaikum, how is zakat calculated on a house? For example, if I buy a house for $500,000 by putting 100K down, and then I have a mortgage debt of 400K, how much is owed?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. The zakat is not due on houses or on land by default. Zakat is only due on a relatively small subset of all possible wealth that a human being may author, right? If it is true, one has purchased, for example, a secondary or tertiary property with the intention of buying and selling it at the time of acquisition, then it is possible that the market value of the house would be a basis for the payment of zakat. But the house, for example, that one lives in is one's primary residence, is not zakatable, and zakat is not due on it.
As a quick follow-up before we get to the next question, when we subtract the debt from our wealth, are we subtracting 1 month or all of the debt, or 1 year, or how much of the debt are we subtracting exactly? What's the best opinion on that?
The debt which is subtracted, for those who hold that it is subtracted, is the debt which is immediately due, that portion of it, as per the payment schedule that applies to that debt. So for example—
Oh, on that day, okay.
No, that applies to that type of debt. So for example, if one is paying residential property financing, a mortgage for short, and a mortgage is paid monthly, then one subtracts 1 month of debt. Right?
I see, okay.
If one has another debt and it's paid every 2 weeks, then one subtracts the currently due amount, which is 2 weeks, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so that case, if someone has a personal debt from a friend, for example, and it's $5,000, and there's no specification of how to pay it, he's going to pay it all back. So then he would subtract the entire $5,000.
If it's currently due, yes.
Okay, if it's due. All right, Sammy, you're up.
All right, Bismillah. So Nabil says, if I didn't pay zakat on my 401k in the past, am I now liable for it? I heard an Islamic opinion in the past that zakat on 401k was not required.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, if one has a high level of resolve and wishes to take the precautionary position, then one pays zakat on one's 401k, 401(k) funds, and similar retirement funds for every year. And if one were to take this position and one had not paid it in past years, then one would pay it for past years as one does with past zakat payments that one has not done. However, the position attributed to the Maliki madhab, which is given by fatwa by even other non-Malikis, which holds that one pays zakat on 401k funds when one has access to them, meaning at the time of retirement, and pays it once, is a sound basis for fatwa, and one may act according to that. Some of the fuqaha of note, contemporary fuqaha, such as per what has been transmitted to me, the students of Sheikh Mufti Allama Muhammad Taqi Osmani hold that zakat is not due on 401k funds, right? Because of the issue as to whether or not they're actually owned by the beneficiary, i.e. the person whose funds they putatively are. And if one takes that position, then one would act accordingly. The precautionary opinion, which is soundest for the poor and the other deserving recipients, is that zakat be paid on 401k funds for every year.
Okay. All right, good. We have a question now from Ali. If holding stock with intent to hold very long term, 15 plus years, for the purpose of collecting the dividends, do I pay zakat on the market value of the stock or just the dividends received? Very good question from Ali.
You pay zakat on the market value of the stock and the dividends received.
He was going to wish he didn't ask the question.
All right. Well,
all right, Sam, you're up.
From Amr Mamin in Central New Jersey, who's also a board member on the WAQF. So shout out to Amr. How does one calculate zakat if invested in illiquid private equity funds where they don't expect distributions until 5 to 7 years?
Mm-hmm. One gets access to the financials and pays on the money, such as working capital, cash equivalents, accounts receivable, immediate, near-term account, short-term accounts receivable, applying near-term payables as a subtracted entity.
Okay, good. Marwa Hassan says, can we pay for a zakah for people who died, but we don't know if they paid their zakah or not? And how long shall we pay zakah for others who died?
Yes, you may pay zakat for people who have passed away, per an opinion of Imam Ahmed, based and elaborated from the hadith, وَدَيْنُ اللَّهِ أَحَقُّ أَن تُؤَدَّى or أَن يُؤَدَّى. That is, the holds that zakat is like a debt due to Allah Azza wa Jal, and that it's paid as per that opinion. One makes one's best estimate to calculate the amount due, and then proceeds accordingly, acting precautionarily, if one takes that position.
Great. All right, Sammy, you're up.
Great. So Sumra Raja says, is zakat due upon jewelry one wears day to day?
No, zakat is not due on jewelry that otherwise would be zakatable because it's gold and silver that one wears day to day, provided that the jewelry is not zakatable for a reason other than being gold and jewelry. For example, being, trade inventory, in which case it's unlikely that one would wear day to day, but it's conceivable to think of a situation in which that's the case. So in summary, no, zakat is not due on gold and silver jewelry the one way that a woman wears day to day. This is an issue of a well-known diversity of opinion among the fuqaha. So if one asks the question of a mufti upon whom one justifiably relies and gets a separate, different answer, then this is to be expected.
Okay. She also asks, do we pay zakat on accounts, savings account and the checking account?
Yes.
Okay.
If both of the accounts together meet or exceed the zakat exemption limit. So.
Good. All right, Sammy, you're up.
Great. Our very own David Hawa from Islamic Relief has asked, can you donate stock for zakat?
Zakat is a portion of certain types of wealth, which in general is transmitted to certain types of deserving recipients once that wealth meets certain exemption limits and has other characteristics that we can discuss. Okay. Stock, if the stock, as we've said previously, is zakatable, and we have said that it is, one pays the zakat on stock in money, right? In gold and silver, it's in its current equivalent in money. So zakat on stock is paid as money. One does not pay it as zakat. So one cannot pay zakat in the form of stocks.
Okay.
I know this does not say that one cannot use stocks for other praiseworthy, general, charitable purposes, such as using them as the basis for a donor advised fund or a trust or to contribute to a WAQF or the like. But with regard to zakat, zakat on stocks is not paid as stocks. Zakat on equity is paid as cash. Wallahu a'lam.
Okay. Similar question from Sayyid Rafi'. Let's say someone does not have the cash to pay zakat, but for example, maybe their stocks are quite sizable and doing well, but he doesn't have the cash to pay for his zakat. What does he do?
He or she pays when he or she can.
Okay, so he treats it as a debt and puts it later.
Okay, great. Back to crypto world. We have a few questions. I might package them for you. But Asim Khan says, I bought crypto in December and January, and it has appreciated, alhamdulillah. I pay zakat in Ramadan. To clarify, because some of the gains have been less than a year, do I pay zakat on the capital I put in and not the gains? And if so,
No.
for next year, do I pay on the total crypto balance minus taxes if I withdraw?
You pay zakat on the entire value of the crypto, adding it to the value of the cash, gold, and silver that you have. You pay 2.5% of the sum.
And that's even if they've held it for less than a year at this point.
Yes, this is on the basis that cryptocurrency, so-called, such as Bitcoin, is trade capital, and it's not actually currency. Right? Now, someone who holds a cryptocurrency as currency would treat it accordingly, right? But I do not. I hold that cryptocurrency is the mathman, that it's the counter value in a purchase transaction, right? And that its default, practically speaking, is that it's acquired for the purpose of selling it in order to benefit from its appreciation. And therefore it's treated as trade inventory. And the zakat on trade inventory, it is not a condition that a Islamic lunar year has elapsed on the trade inventory. Rather, the value of the trade inventory is added to the value of the gold and silver, which is actually its basis, right? Which was used in order to acquire it. And that's aggregated along with other gold, silver, and cash that one has, and one pays 2.5% on the total. Wallahu a'lam.
Okay, great. Now we have a very interesting question, but first, before I get to that, I have to interrupt Sheikh and see if you have a earbud to put in, because the reverb is getting, and some of the folks are not able to hear the question properly. If there is an earbud, that would solve that problem, inshallah. For some people, they're not able to hear our questions, unfortunately. So,
unfortunately, I did, but my earbud failed, which is why I went back to.
Oh, okay.
We'll try it from time to time.
Okay. Another suggestion might be, Sheikh, that while we're asking the question, perhaps you mute yourself and then unmute yourself to speak. That might help as well.
Okay, good idea. This question is from Muhammad Ishtiyaq Khatri. Is zakat applicable on HSA accounts?
Yes, zakat is applicable on HSA accounts.
Okay, and HSA, just for the clarity of the audience, is
health saving accounts.
Okay, good. All right, Sam, you're
Great.
up.
So, Sheikh, on donor advised funds, this is from Ramiz Qudsi. And thank you all for the fantastic questions. I mean, you're making this such a valuable session, mashallah. But for donor advised funds, can an individual set up a donor advised fund from sudden income inheritance 1 year and use it to pay future zakat obligations on an annual basis?
Yes, one may do so. And whether zakat is due on the funds in the donor advised fund itself depends upon other issues that require additional analysis. So one should consult a Sharia advisor to have them look into it. For example, if the donor advised funds are funds that are actually used in order to fund a WAQF, and the associated transaction is a WAQF creation transaction, then zakat would not be due on the funds. But if that's not the case, then even though legally the contribution is irrevocable, that in itself does not necessarily mean that Sharia-wise, that one does not remain the owner of the funds. So one should assume that zakat is due upon the donor advised funds, unless there is a basis for assuming otherwise. One should consult a recognized expert in the application of the determination of the Sharia to financial matters, and consult him or her in order to ascertain what's the case. But as for the question that was asked, which is whether or not zakat, whether or not payments from the DAF, from the donor advised funds, can be used to pay future zakat applications, then the answer is yes, insofar as the money, which is in the donor advised fund, is a portion of the cash that one has, right? And when one has different amounts of cash in various different locations, one can pay zakat from any one of them.
Okay, great. Great, thank you. This question is from Harris Amin, and he asks, for crypto, you have to pay capital gains tax. Should that be deducted? And is the 1 calendar year rule apply?
No, it should not be deducted. That's precautionary and best for the poor.
I got you. Okay.
And the other recipients.
Okay. From Imran Khan, how do you pay zakat on store inventory when you're not aware of the value of the inventory, nor how long you've had it? And how do Muslim businesses with big inventories pay zakat if it leads to loss?
So it is the norm that retailers and others who trade in goods are aware of the value of the goods. It's difficult to conceive of trading remotely successfully in any inventory without being aware of the value of the inventory. So if one does not know the value, then appraising the value of the inventory is a precondition for being able to pay zakat on it. As for the amount of time that one has it, again, it's the norm that one knows how long one has had one's inventory in different subsets thereof. But one should remember that payment is due on trade inventory, and it's not a condition that the trade inventory has been in one's possession for an Islamic lunar year, but rather, as I said, the value of the trade inventory on the day that zakat is due is added to the other cash, gold and silver that one has, and then 2.5% is paid on the sum of that. To put it differently, trade inventory differs from gold and silver and cash in that it is not a condition that one Islamic lunar year has elapsed in order for zakat to be due on it.
Okay. All right.
Sheikh, if I could just ask a follow-up question. I'm sorry, Sheikh Shadi.
Sure, go ahead.
What about inventory that's constantly rotating, like a restaurant, where there's constantly food coming in and being cooked and so on? How do you do that?
The zakat is paid on the value of the trade inventory on the day that zakat is due.
Okay.
So just as one's cash, gold and silver, may increase or decrease through the year, but the zakat which is due is that zakat that is 2.5% of the cash that one has on one zakat due date. Similarly, for trade inventory, one pays for on the basis of the value of the trade inventory on the day that zakat is due.
All right. This question is not from any of the chats. It's from a text message. If you purchase another property that you may choose to use occasionally or rent out occasionally, so sometimes you use it, sometimes you rent it out, would you have to pay zakat on it? If so, do you pay it on the value of the property or on the rental income?
No, you would not pay zakat on the property itself, because as described in the question, the property is not trade inventory because it was not acquired with the intention of selling it and profiting from the gains to be made thereby. Rather, it seems to be a property that has been acquired in order to put it to multiple uses, among them to use it oneself, among them to rent it. In that case, such a property is not zakatable. It should be noted, of course, that the rental fees that come from it, cash, would be added to one's cash. And once those rental fees meet the conditions of zakat, meaning that when added to the rest of one's funds, they exceed the zakat exemption limit, the nisab, and an Islamic lunar year has elapsed on those rental fees, then zakat is due on them on the 2.5 1/40th, at the 2.5% 1/40th rate.
Just quick follow up on that. If somebody has many different investments and money coming in, and it becomes very difficult for them to track what lunar year happened for each one, can they just dump it all into one pot?
Yes, and the cash that comes in should be treated in that way.
Okay, thank you.
Just to piggyback off that last question, David Howell also asked, is there zakat on a rental property? So I don't know if it makes a difference that the intention is just to be a rental property.
No, there is no zakat on the rental property. Although, as we mentioned, there is zakat if it meets the condition on the cash that one receives as rental fees.
And just to follow up on that, is it the rental fees minus if there's a halal mortgage on the property? Is it the difference between the two? If it's a wash between the rental fees and what you're paying for it in terms of your debt amount, is there still zakat due on the rental fees?
Zakat is due on the rental fees if the rental fees meet the conditions of zakat for cash, which would include, as we just mentioned, the year having elapsed on them, and when they're added to the other cash that one has, whether or not they meet or exceed the exemption limit. One applies the subtraction of the currently due liabilities for the rental properties, such as property financing, just as one would acquire the immediately due debts across the cash that one has. But there's no particular positioning of the rental fees coming from that property and the liabilities coming from that property that goes to answer the question as to whether or not zakat is due on the rental fees associated with the property. Rather, the rental fees are treated like any other cash that one has as income. And it's added to the rest of one's cash that one has. And on one's zakat date, 2.5% of the total cash that one has is paid as zakat.
Okay, good. Sammy, quick question. Did you ask the question yet from Ramiz Qudsi on the donor advised funds? Did you ask that yet?
Yes. Yes.
We did ask that. Okay, good. So now we go to Abu Dhar Khan. He says, another clarification I seek. So I have been here in the U.S. for almost 2 years and living on rent. My home back in India is on rent. Meanwhile, so does that offset the rent here?
I do not understand the question. Please forgive me. That's a failing on my part.
No problem. So Abu Dhar, if you can clarify that. In the meantime, Elif is asking, Elif K is asking, all these answers that we're giving, are they madhab specific or do they apply to all the madhabs?
No, the answers that I'm giving are not meant to be sound for all the madhahib, because for some of the questions, and in general, for many of the questions, or a significant portion of the questions in this topic, the topic of zakat, there is, alhamdulillah, a diversity of opinion, which is a manifestation of Allah's rahmah, across the madhahib with regard to the issues that are being asked. In general, the answers that I give will be informed by Shafi'i fiqh and then Hanbali fiqh. And for those that are issues that are contemporary issues, then they will represent the going opinion of essentially the world's authorities, primarily as they come together in academies, fiqh academies, on the application of fiqh, Islamic ethics and law to these contemporary issues, such as the OIC Fiqh Academy or the OAFI Sharia Board, the Accounting and Auditing Organization of Islamic Financial Institutions, or various specialty conferences brought together for the purpose of answering questions related to zakat that have been issued and published on behalf of a collective of fuqaha across the madhahib.
Jazakallah khair. So Ali bin Saad, local, Ali bin Saad, represent. Is zakat due on books that are used for a student of knowledge, but could be sold later on? This could also apply to college students who resell textbooks.
No, zakat is not due in either one of the cases that you just mentioned. That a property could be sold later or is sold later does not make it zakatable. In order, in general, for property to be zakatable, it needs to have been acquired with the intention of selling it, meaning it's acquired with the intention of it being tradable, that to be traded, as is the case for the retail inventory of a retailer. Okay. If one acquires something and did not have the intention of acquiring in order to sell it later at the time of acquisition, but later sells it or later changes one's mind after acquiring it to sell it, then zakat is not doing it.
So in summary, it's based on the first intention that a person has.
Yes.
Or the biggest intention. Okay.
Sure.
We have a question from another Ali. How should I calculate zakah on Reits or real estate investment trusts? Does this differ from how I should calculate zakah on a rental property?
Zakat should be calculated on the value of one's holding in the REIT, on the real estate investments trust. And one should treat it as one would treat, for example, one's holdings in a mutual fund or a similar investment fund. This is true whether the REIT is a Sharia compliant, a certified Sharia compliant certified REIT, and those are a small minority, or it is not, which is the majority of REITs, of real estate and investment trusts. And one should be careful with regard to investing in such things.
All right, good. Sammy, you're up.
Jazakallah. So Brother Ramiz writes, purging interest, understanding that unavoidable riba should be purged. So that's just the understanding it should be purged. What is the best way of doing that? Is it okay to donate to Islamic charities, mosques, etc.? Can zakat be from this, given that the riba contributed to income?
The best way to discharge funds that have come into one's apparent possession but are impermissible, such as fees that are interest accruals, is by giving them to general avenues of charity. Things that are akin to the sort of things that the Umatic treasury would spend on if it existed, such as paving roads and the like. When one discharges such funds, one is not performing an act of sadaqah, and one should be aware of that. One is not performing an act of sadaqah because one does not own the funds, and one can only make zakat of things that one owns, right? But rather one is discharging funds that one does not own, treating them in a way that the Sharia requires that one treat money. Money can't be destroyed and thrown away. That's a sin in addition to the sin associated of acquiring them, all right? So it can be used, for example, for the paving of roads, the creation of sanitation, or plumbing or infrastructure resources for general societal benefit and the like. It should not be used, according to the precautionary and soundness opinion, for the building of masajid, the houses of Allah. Such funds are filth, according to many of the fuqaha, and it's not suitable and appropriate that they be used in order to build a masajid. As for their use for feeding individuals, there's a well-known difference of opinion among the fuqaha with regard to this. There are fuqaha who hold that it is permissible to use it to feed, for example, orphans. And this is a position towards which I incline, right? Yes, wallahu a'lam.
As a follow-up to the masjid building, does it matter if it goes to the building of the parking lot of a masjid or some use that won't ordinarily be used as the prayer area, or is there no distinction?
If one's able to designate and has a preponderance of suspicion that there exist controls that will actually have some funds be used for some things and some funds be used for other things, and one can confirm that that's the case, then it's conceivable that that's the case, right? In general, however, when it comes to the masjid and its accessories, one should single out the clearly pure of one's funds for such things, so that one receives a benefit and maximizes one's benefit.
Okay.
Wallahu a'lam.
Good. Yusuf Ani says, do you pay zakat for minors if you have access to their money? Specifically, if you have accounts for them that you contribute to with the intention that the money will be theirs someday.
Yes. Taking the second question first, in the scenario mentioned in the second question, then those funds are yours. So of course, you should pay zakat on them. Dealing with the first question, which is a more general case, if one is the guardian, the Sharia recognized guardian for such minors, then zakat is due on such money.
Okay, good.
Right. So Abu says, not exactly a zakat question, but does one pay fitra for a child in the womb?
One does not pay fitra for a child in the womb, provided that the child has not been born on the day that fitra is due.
Okay. And others have asked the question of if their son or daughter is, they work, they live at the house, they live with the parents, but they haven't married yet. They earn a very healthy income themselves while living with the family. Does the father still pay zakat al-fitr for them, or do they pay their own zakat al-fitr since they have full-time jobs or maybe part-time jobs?
Zakat is due
Zakat al-fitr.
Zakat al-fitr is due on Muslims, old and young, across various conditions of life. The sunnah is that it be paid by the head of the household. If it was previous the case that the head of the household, the father, pays for the other members, and this individual is one of those other members, and recently one has acquired enough money that he or she is able to pay on his or her own, then it's conceivable that the head of a household will continue to pay on their behalf. If the person is mukallaf, right, is of age such that they're ethically and legally responsible, and they have their own source of income, then it is perhaps better that they pay on their own behalf, right? And if they are someone who may become the head of a household at some time in the future, then there's an additional advantage to this in that they begin to do something that they're going to have to do later. Wallahu a'lam.
Okay, good. Sammy?
So Z Shadow, I think asking in follow-up to one of the previous answers says, if you withdraw 2.5% from a taxable brokerage, the money is taxed by the US for capital gains at a rate of 10 to 20%. So then you would be paying more in taxes and not allowing the account to grow because a good return in a year is around 10%. And you're paying more in taxes just to pay your zakat, ? How is this fair?
I'm not sure what the person means by how is it fair. Fair to whom? When one looks at the application of justice, and we'll narrow it here to giving every individual who has rights their due, among the issues, among the parties in play, when we're talking about paying zakat, are the just and deserving recipients of zakat. So how would it be fair to not pay zakat to them because of the difficulty that one may or may not meet because one suffers a tax penalty? As I mentioned earlier, money, zakat may be paid on monies from monies other than monies such as those that are mentioned in this example that are in an account where there's some sort of penalty or potential tax liability associated with withdrawal. So if one has money outside of the account from which one can pay the zakat, which is due on all of one's monies in sum, then this is a way that one could deal with this situation. But to zero in on your scenario, because this needs to be understood, the possibility of having one's money confiscated by a non-Sharia recognized entity does not in and of itself obviate and do away with the obligation, Sharia-wise, to pay zakat. And one should establish clarity on this matter, because one then runs the risk of not putting things in their proper priority, of being more concerned about consequence X when consequence Y, non-payment of zakat, is much greater in this world and the next. May Allah Azza wa Jalla save us from that. And not prioritizing consequences and being afraid of the small and not being aware of the huge and the large is not the action of sound thinking individuals. May Allah make it easy for us to do those things which are required of us, since the nature of our Sharia, of our ethical legal system, is that meeting its obligation is overwhelmingly associated with things which are down to our own benefit. Zakat, as is known, has the lexical meaning of increase, in praise, in growth, but also purification. It's known and recognized among the fuqaha that zakat is a benefit to those who receive it and those who pay it. Its benefit to those who receive it is perhaps clear. Its benefit to those who pay it is that it is tatir, it's a purification of what remains of their funds. خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ, take from their wealth, sadaqatan, by which you pure them, mentioned in the ayah. تُطَهِّرُهُمْ بِهَا. The giving of zakat is a purification for the one who gives it. It is folly and a failure to understand zakat as zakat, and to understand the difference between zakat and, for example, tax, to conceive of zakat with one's heart and mind, not to mention it on the tongue, as though it were a penalty and a tax. And for this reason, the fuqaha of the Hanabila mentioned that among the adab associated with giving zakat is that when one gives zakat, when the giver makes it, the recipient makes a dua for the one who gives the zakat, and one of the siyaq, one of the forms of this dua is وَبَارِكْ لَكَ فِيمَا أَبْقَيْتَ, and may he bless you in that which remains, right? And purify it for you, mentioned explicitly in the dua, right? This is by way of reminding, again, the recipient and the giver that by giving zakat, one is not hurting oneself, rather one is benefiting oneself. This is a reality which falls under the general reality mentioned by the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that sadaqah does not diminish wealth, but the specific reality associated with the zakat, which is indicated in part by the name zakat, purification being one of the meanings thereof. Wallahu a'lam.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. We have an interesting question on drop shipping from Ali bin Saad. Many e-commerce do, or not drop shipping, but well, it is drop shipping is included. But e-commerce business, they don't hold any stock. They sell products that are made on demand. So, what is their zakat on inventory if that's the case?
Yeah. So, if it is in fact the case for one's business that at the time, at one's zakat date, that one does not have possession of the trade inventory, then one does not pay on the trade inventory. If on one's zakat date, one does have possession of trade inventory, then the value of that trade inventory is included with the value of one's cash, and zakat is paid upon the aggregate. Wallahu a'lam.
So Umer Javed, and I believe we covered this, but for folks that may have tuned in a little bit late, but when paying zakat on stocks, do we also take the same 2.5% of the stock's value? I'm asking for long-term investing and not day trading.
Yes, one pays 2.5% on the stock's value.
So Hamza Qureshi writes, you may have addressed this already, and this is near and dear to the WAQF's heart, but is the IRUSA WAQF zakat eligible? Would you consider that to be something
I don't know.
If you've ever
And
visited
in my not
Istanbul,
knowing, there's an opportunity to clarify an important issue for our community. The way that one would know that any entity, IRUSA, WAQF, and other entities is zakat eligible is by having it be certified zakat eligible. In order to do that, one has a Sharia advisor. Ideally, for financial entities, charities, one would have, in keeping with the standards which have been developed, which have been accepted throughout the world, a Sharia advisory review panel consisting of at least 3 members, at least 2 of whom are Mufti class fuqaha of recognized expertise on the application of the determinations and principles of the Sharia with regard to financial matters to contemporary financial issues, and have them review the operations of the entity, among which would also be issues as to whether or not it's zakat eligible. And once a certification is issued by that entity, then that is relied on by the entity that they cover and by partners, consumers, donors, and others inside the space. Therefore, doing away with the need of having to ask Imam prayer leaders, Quran reciters, specialists, non-specialists, and what have you, who may or may not have insight into the operations of the entity which is being covered, but rather, as one does for accounting or one does for legal advice, one gets specialists and then has published opinions from them, and one can rely upon them in keeping with the practice among the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, which does not require every individual to become an expert on matters of fiqh, but rather holds that it's permissible and required, if they're not mujtahideen themselves, that they rely upon the opinions of others. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. With regard to the specific issue of whether or not one can give zakat to a waqf, not this waqf, what have you. No, one cannot give zakat to a waqf. Zakat must be transferred, possession of it must be transferred to the deserving recipient. When one gives wealth to a waqf, one is not transferring it to someone else. Rather, one is shedding one's own possession of it and giving it metaphorically to Allah, who's the owner of everything. That those funds may be used for recipients down the line, or rather profit, what's made from the investment of those funds may go to the class of recipients who may also be zakat recipients, does not mean that it's allowed to pay zakat to a waqf. The waqf is a crucially important solution to many of the issues that challenge us ummatically, and this community in particular. And I strongly encourage brothers and sisters to do as IRUSA WAQF is doing and others are doing in order to find innovative and helpful ways to use the waqf to solve many of our issues. But al-Qaf in and of themselves are not targeted recipients of zakat in general.
Great. We have a question from Imran Khan. What is the adab of finding out if someone is zakat eligible and ensuring that it's going to the right people?
The obligation for discerning whether or not people are zakat eligible, collecting zakat, accounting for it, keeping it, transporting it, distributing it, what have you, is an ummatic level obligation which is borne by the Sharia recognized governmental authority, the Imam, the Sultan. In the absence of that, in keeping with principles that are explicit in the Maliki Madhab and are recognized on tahqiq, when one looks upon the matter in greater investigation by all the madhahib, then the obligation for that redounds to the entire community. So the community is responsible to do so. When one pays one zakat to a zakat receiving organization, such as a Muslim-run, Muslim-targeting humanitarian organization, what one is doing is different from what one does if one pays zakat to zakat collectors associated with the governmental authority. What one is essentially doing when one pays zakat to an entity which is a Muslim-run, Muslim-targeting humanitarian organization is one is entrusting, deputizing that organization and its factors to distribute one's zakat on one's behalf, right? One is still responsible oneself for making sure that the zakat receives justified and deserving recipients. And if it doesn't, then one's responsibility to pay zakat has not been discharged. So this is an area one needs to be exceedingly careful, right? Which is why the amana, the obligation, and the duty that such organizations take upon themselves is great, and one should be careful of being expansive with regard to applying the ideas of the deserving recipients of zakat, because it's an obligation which is a subset of the larger group of sadaqah, which is supererogatory. Zakat is one of the sha'air, one of the manifest, known, recognizable principles and bases of our deen, and it has specific ahkam determinations associated with it, and one should be careful about upholding them.
Great.
Go ahead.
Sammy, you're up.
So similar, I think, to a question that we had for the donor advised funds, Faisal Khan from Islamic Relief, shout out, is asking, how is zakat handled for charitable lead trusts and charitable remainder trusts?
Okay, so in general, unless, similar to what we saw for the donor advised funds, unless there is an indication in the structure of the transaction, normally as indicated by the accompanying paperwork, that funds that have been put in a charitable remainder trust or charitable lead trust or other trusts, that they have been made awqaf, that have been made Sharia recognized endowments in which property has, the ownership of the property has been shed by the giver and has been dedicated lillah, for Allah, and Allah is the owner of all, meaning that the underlying property, in this case, the cash, is not to be spent, not to be given to anyone, and not to be transferred to anyone in perpetuity, but rather profit, which accrues to the endowment through the productive employment of the funds, their investment, is used for designated classes of deserving recipients. That's what a waqf is. Unless there's an indication that the charitable remainder trusts or the charitable lead trusts are part of the creation of a Sharia recognized waqf, then zakat is still due on such funds. Right? So the way zakat should be treated for them is that zakat should be annually, every Islamic in 1 year, should be calculated on it. If it exceeds, is the norm, the nisab, and zakat should be paid on those funds, from those funds.
Okay, good. Aziz asks if Islamic institutions can be considered as the fi sabilillah category.
There is a well-known diversity of opinion about this. My position is that an Islamic institution, being an Islamic institution in and of itself, does not mean that it may be treated as fi sabilillah, but rather that fi sabilillah has a specific meaning, which refers to Sharia recognized military conflict, and that it does not refer to general avenues of good more generally, and that the precautionary position is that one be specific and fastidious with regard to using zakat funds for the named 8 categories of recipients mentioned in the ayah, إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين إلى آخر الآية, and that one, despite the need and the very practical challenges associated with building and maintaining institutions, resist the temptation to use zakat for those purposes, but rather use general sadaqat, or more specifically, the awqaf, the waqf, the endowment, which is underutilized ummatically on the level of the ummah and in general by our community here in North America. And were it to be used and to be better used innovatively and creatively and with a knowledge of the fiqh that applies, many of the issues that we are challenged with regard to annual fundraising and difficulties associated with various institutions and funding them and funding students of knowledge and funding imam ratibun and muftis and people doing tahkim and the like would be treated. And may Allah Azza wa Jalla make it easy for us to apply the appropriate solutions to the appropriate answers.
Okay.
Even for those who hold that it could be treated in such, the general position is not that this is a super expansive open treatment of any type of Islamic activity, but rather one should look for a certification from a designated entity that indicates that it can be treated, used for this purpose. That entity being a panel of 3 experts, not the same as a recommendation from a known Muslim personality in whom one thinks well. There being a difference between one and the other. Allah.
Good.
Great. So, and you may have covered this previously, but in case Amr Memon says, going back to the 401k that we discussed, he understands that one pays zakat, but is it appropriate to subtract income tax and early withdrawal penalties in calculating the owed amounts?
Precautionarily, no. But if one doesn't have resolve to do so, but wishes to take the opinion that that zakat is due on them every year, then one may. Of course, if one takes a position that they're paid after one receives them, then one will only receive them after, well, then no penalties will be applied, and they will be taxed at the appropriate tax rate. At which point, one also preferably does not apply the tax as a liability to the funds.
All right,
A
so
precautionary approach to the payment of zakat increases the benefit for the poor and indigent and the other recipients of zakat.
Okay. All right, so we have now a question on collectibles. People have collectibles that one day may be sold, but they have them because they enjoy to collect them. This is from Sohaib Awan. Is zakat due on this paraphernalia, sport and film collectibles, and how is their value determined?
If one did not acquire them with the intention of selling them, as is the case with a retailer or a trader with trade inventory, then zakat is not doing them.
Not due. Okay. All right, Sammy, you're up.
Great. So Ahad Abbasi says, so if I understand correctly, a conservative approach is that zakat is due on the 401k complete face rather than the portion if that you can access on the date that you pay the zakat. So I think this is just clarifying.
If you have retirement funds and you are able to access the retirement funds, right, without penalty, then zakat is due on them the way they would be due on any sum of money. All right. If in the case of the 401k, because one hasn't reached retirement age and one can't access the funds without a penalty, then as I mentioned before, if one's a person of high resolve, then one pays zakat every single year. This is a position which is apparently the position of fatwa of the Shafi'i madhab. Okay. A position which exists with the Maliki madhab is that one pays zakat when one has access to the funds, meaning at retirement age, and pays just once for that. Okay. A position of the Hanbali madhab is that one pays, one has access to the funds, but pays for the intervening zakat years. All right.
Okay. Good.
Okay. So again, if one wants to take the high resolve position and pay every single year, one would pay, yes, for the face value of the 401k.
Okay, good. An interesting question from Nindi Big. How do you treat zakat on a charitable trust?
We mentioned this earlier. If zakat is due on a charitable trust, then one adds the amount of cash and cash equivalents in the trust to one's other cash and pays 2.5% on the aggregate, on the sum.
Okay, good.
So Omar Awan says, how does one determine if a first or second degree relative is eligible to receive zakat? Is this purely a subjective matter, or are there objective guidelines?
It is not a subjective matter. There are objective guidelines. It is commendable, superior, to pay zakat to one's relatives over paying it to others. It is not permissible to pay zakat to any relative whom one is required to take care of by the Sharia otherwise. So one may not pay zakat to one's children or to any of one's descendants, meaning one's grandchildren or the like, right? Because Sharia-wise, one is required to take care of them. Similarly, one may not pay to any of one's ancestors, meaning to one's parents or to one's grandparents, right? Because with consideration of scenarios, one is responsible for taking care of them if that would be, if that were required. As for one's brother, for example, then paying zakat to them is expected to fall under the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that paying zakat to one's relative, to the qarib, is sadaqah wa salah, meaning it's both sadaqah, it's paying sadaqah wajiba, paying zakat, and one has a reward for that, and silatul rahim, and in tightening and maintaining and reinforcing family ties, so one is being rewarded for two highly meritorious acts of good deeds.
Okay. I have a question here. Tariq Mazhar asked a question, but just for the sake of the Sheikh's time, this is something that we sort of discussed, but I'll ask it anyway. Is zakat due on child's college saving funds that is not accessible until they turn 18? Actually, maybe the not accessible part is a new question, part of the question.
Yes, with the same categorization mentioned for 401ks or 403bs. That high resolve would be to pay on it for every single year, and that if one treated it per the alternative opinions mentioned, then there's a basis for doing that as well.
Okay, good.
Ahad Arif asks a pretty interesting question here. Do you have to pay zakat on the value of your credit card points?
No.
Okay. Elif has an interesting question here, and I've seen this actually. Can you pay zakat more than once? And I'm going to add to this. So, for example, zakat al-fitr, they paid for you, but you want to pay for yourself. Can you pay zakat in advance? So I have some extra money. I'm going to put this money. I'm going to pay extra zakat this year, and subtract it from next year if I have zakat for next year. So that's two questions in one.
So the second question, yes, it's permissible to pay zakat before it's due, up to 1 year or up to 2 years, with a well-known diversity of opinion among the fuqaha, a max up to 2 years beforehand, with, as the Sheikh mentioned, when applying it and keeping track of the actual date, and also other factors as to whether or not the recipient of the zakat continues to be a recipient of zakat at the time that the zakat is due, and the like. So there's some detail there, but the short answer is yes, one may pay zakat in advance. In the first scenario, with regard to paying zakat al-fitr, when one knows that someone else has paid on one's behalf, and the other person is one that would pay on one's behalf, such as one being a minor in the household of one's father, and the father paying on behalf of any other members of the household. And in that case, that's sadaqah, and it's praiseworthy and commendable, but it's not zakat al-fitr. Whichever one is paid first is the actual zakat al-fitr.
Okay, thank you.
So I think this is in reference, so this is Amr Memin. I think this is in reference to a previous question asked, but some scholars cite, if you have a long-term buy and hold strategy for equity investments, one only needs to pay on current assets or 25% of market value. Where does this view fall short in your analysis?
I'm not aware of the basis for the 25% of market value. I'm not familiar with that, with 25% of market value, nor can I conceive of a basis for that. So I couldn't comment on that past that. With regard to the differentiation between long-term buy and hold, I'm aware of that. Apparently, that would be as to the point of differentiation, the farak would be whether or not the equity assets are to be treated as trade inventory or not, with the idea presumably being that if they're held for long term, then they're not trade inventory, and therefore zakat isn't due on them. The position which seems consistent with the going opinion of the WAQF Sharia committee is that zakat is paid due on equity without this differentiation with regard to whether it's long term or short term. And that's ahwat, that's precautionary, which is why I incline towards it. That, along with it being the position of the majority of fuqaha who are specialists in this space.
Okay, this question is on, again, about the recipients and receiving. Is it enough if an individual tells you they're zakat eligible?
As a matter of fiqh, if a person tells you that they're zakat eligible and there are no obvious factors which run counter to that, then one can rely upon their opinion with regard to giving them of your zakat. Right? The norm and the superior position is that in the absence of a Sharia recognized governmental authority who discharges the responsibility of monitoring and being aware of individuals who should receive zakat, that we have institutions that do that governmental authority, do that governmental activity for us, right? And this is particularly important because where Islamic adab, Islamic etiquettes are being maintained, the etiquette is that many people who are recipients of zakat will comport themselves in such a way so that their need is not obvious, right? And consistent with the ayat of the book, with the afuf, and not asking the people ilhafa, and so on and so forth. The obligation to make sure zakat reaches them continues to be an obligation on the community, even for such people. Even if they're comporting themselves in such a way that they don't ask or they don't manifest themselves. As Ibn Umar says, when speaking about one of the positions of tafsir with regard to the difference between the faqir and the miskin, a position attributed to Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, him and his father, is that the faqir is the person who has nice clean clothing and doesn't have the marks of need on him, and you wouldn't know because he didn't ask people. It's still an obligation to give zakat to such people. So we need to be careful about this. Since we live in a locale in which we don't have either a governmental authority and we don't even have qudat, Islamic magistrates, judges who would take this a responsibility in the absence of a governmental authority, we need to, as an obligation, fard kifaya, as a communal obligation, have processes and institutions that monitor, and there are ways to do this, and are made aware of people's potential needs so that people's needs are met.
Okay, one quick follow-up, and as we wrap up the today's program, because we only have a few questions left, and we're also reaching our time limit. But the follow-up here is, someone maybe have many assets and was wealthy, went into a bad business trade, and now are on the zero in terms of their cash, but they have assets such as cars and homes and things like this. Are they bound or obligated to start selling their assets before receiving zakat?
No.
Okay, thank you. All right, Sammy?
So we have
Although
a question.
the adab would be that they do so.
Okay. Out of an adab, not
Right.
as an
But
obligation.
Right.
Okay.
So Ahad Arif asks, is zakat due upon money loaned out to family members?
If the family members to whom one loans money are well off, and one has an expectation that the payment, which is due, is going to be coming soon, then that money should be added to the monies that one has in zakat should be calculated on it. If the family members are not well off, or there's another reason to expect that the money will not be available in the short term, then one pays zakat on those funds only when one receives them. Wallahu a'lam.
Okay. All right. Kuzda says, is it safe to assume that annual inventory taxes and annual inventories can be intended as zakah? But then they won't go to the right recipient, though. Right?
I don't know. I don't understand the question. What is
like
meant by
saying that
annual inventory taxes?
Okay, we'll see if there's a clarification. In the meantime, Marwa Hassan says she brings up a fatwa and she'd like your comments on this fatwa. Some scholars say that one can pay 10% on the interests earned on savings in certificates of deposits instead of the 2.5% in the amount that passes an Islamic year. This is assuming that the interest payments are the only source of income for the family, especially for a widow who does not taking care of children. Maybe I think she meant is taking care.
The interest that one receives on certificates of deposits and other usurious tools is impermissible. Right? It's not permissible to invest in them. It's not permissible to take possession of such funds. If one is in a situation where if one were to shed such funds, it would result in one's own starvation or the starvation of one's dependents, what have you, then one acts with an eye towards practicality and with a depth of concern for reorientation and repentance as per the consultation with an alim who knows one's situation best. Analogized as it is sometimes to driving on a highway, realizing one's going very much in the wrong direction and heading towards calamity, realizing that an exit exists for one to get out, turn around, and head in the right direction, as opposed to slamming on the brake and turning around with the consequences associated therefrom. Right? One should be both fully aware of the fact that it's impermissible, fully heartbroken with regard to wanting to divest oneself from them, without throwing oneself into the Sharia recognized harm associated with not having food to eat, not having a place to live, so on and so forth. With regard to the position she mentioned with regard to paying 10% on the interest, paying on service instead of 2.5%, I'm not aware of this.
Okay.
If it is a fatwa, then it's evaluated on the basis of fatwa from anyone else.
Okay. All right, we're reaching our time limit. So, Sammy, I only have one question left. So let's take your question, and then I'll do my question, and then we can show the. You can tell us about Islamic Relief, and we will have discharged Sheikh Taha on his annual education of the Ummah on Zakah, and inshallah, this will become a playlist. Each question will be chopped up so that people could scroll every year and see the same questions are being asked. And they could click on that question, and it'll make it easier for the community, inshallah ta'ala. So, Sammy, why don't you go with your question?
Yeah, I think that'd be a great option to have. And Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Taha. We must have exhausted you with this, this many questions. But the final question that I have, I mean, inshallah, from everyone. The last question I have is from David Hawa. Can you make all donations with the intention of zakat, knowing that you will overpay? Would everything overpaid end up being sadaqah?
I'm treating zakat precautionarily so that if one needs to make estimation, one is more likely to pay more than pay less is wise and is the way that one should approach with an eye towards precaution. If one does so, then the expectation is that even the surplus will be rewarded as zakat.
Okay.
Amazing.
Good. And my final question is from Shah Jalal. He says, if someone has a stock for the value to pay zakat for the nisab date on the next day, but the stock falls the stock value falls down to near zero, how will the person pay stock? Zakat.
Yeah, zakat is due as per the market value of the stock on the zakat due date. Right? So once that is assessed, that's the zakat that's due. Okay. If the value of the item suffers a depreciation after the zakat due date, that has no effect on the amount of zakat due.
Okay.
So one still pays the amount of zakat due from one's monies, gold, silver, and cash.
I see. All right. Sheikh Taha, thank you so much for taking the time out. We've had you on for exactly 90 minutes. And in fasting, that's sort of like maybe 180 minutes, right? While fasting and not having any sugar or caffeine or anything like that. So we thank you so much again for taking your time out and being with us. And may Allah Ta'ala reward you and bless your family and make from your family come out some more ulama wa fuqaha wa sulaha wa du'a fi sabilillah.
May Allah Azza wa Jalla have mercy on us and forgive us and accept from us during these blessed times.
Ameen. Thank you so much. And now we'll turn to Sammy. So you have something to tell us about IRUSA. I heard it's something, you had a neat video for us.
Yeah, we do. So Brother Naeem, if you could roll the tape, please.
Here we go.
If you've ever visited Istanbul, Turkey, you've no doubt visited the Suleymaniye complex, a grand multifunctional space consisting of a mosque, a medical school, a hospital, a public kitchen, and more. It's one of the most incredible examples of a waqf in Islamic history. A notable example of a waqf today is the Jerusalem Islamic Waqf. Some form of this waqf has managed Islamic complexes in the old city of Jerusalem since the year 1187 and has been sustaining it through changing political climates. In this way, the waqf can serve as a legal protection for organizations as well, ensuring its charitable efforts to continue in perpetuity. Following in this remarkable tradition of the waqf, today Islamic Relief USA is excited to announce the launch of IRUSA Waqf, an endowment aiming to protect the work we do for our communities and ensuring we can do it for many years to come. What is a waqf? In simple terms, a waqf is an endowment created by a community for the benefit of the most vulnerable amongst the community. How does it work? You as a donor contribute an amount to IRUSA Waqf. This can be in the form of cash, real estate, stocks and bonds, donor advised funds, or any means appropriate for you. A team of our talented financial experts invest your donation in Sharia-compliant investment portfolios. The return of your donation funds IRUSA charitable efforts while your original donation is maintained. In this way, your original donation can support Islamic relief programs in perpetuity as a sadaqah jariyah. But why should you donate? How does this benefit you as a donor? Through your donations, you're able to support Islamic relief projects around the world. You can earn tax benefits. You can earn an investment back through the trust. And you are leaving a legacy, a sadaqah jariyah. To learn more about what we do and how to leave your charitable legacy, visit our website at irusawaqf.org. IRUSA Waqf, reviving tradition, building legacy.
Brothers and sisters, thank you all very much for being part of this and for bringing out your really, really great questions. Maybe we missed one or two because of the time constraint, but inshallah, somehow we will be able to get to those, whether it's by through text or some other way, we'll be able to answer those questions. Sammy, it was really fun actually going back and forth. It was a good idea to do this together with IRUSA. You guys have a great operation going on. So thank you so much for facilitating this. And we have on the back end someone that you didn't see named Naeem, who did all the camera work and the popping up the questions and bringing the screens out. So he did a great job. So thank you to him as well. Any closing comments, Sammy?
No, that's it. Jazakallah khair to you, Sheikh Shadi, and to the amazing work that Safina Society continues to do, and continuing to educate the community. It's been a blessing in the local community and nationally and internationally. So Jazakallah khair to you and to the Safina Society. And if anybody has any further questions on the IRUSA WAQF, please feel free to reach us. You can go to our website, irusawaqf.org, and ask away. But Jazakallah khair for everyone in attending, and definitely to the Sheikh, amazing program. Wassalamu alaikum.
Ameen. Jazakallah khairan. And everyone, one final word. We're now in the last 10 nights, so pull hard on your dua. Put your hopes and your dreams right in front of your eyes, and know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-qadir ala kulli shay, and He is Kareem. And first and foremost, we ask Allah ta'ala to give us afu and afiyah, forgiveness
Ameen.
and protection in our deen. Grant us istiqamah on the book and the sunnah until the day we meet Him, and then we may bring to Him all of our hopes and dreams and desires and goals for this year and going forward in the future, for ourselves, for our children, for the rest of the ummah. جزاكم الله خيرا. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
We believe in Allah. We believe that all life is sacred, that everyone has the right to dignity. We believe in going the extra mile to help people in areas others don't go. And we believe in the words of Allah, that with difficulty comes ease. Because each day we see your donations bring ease for people in desperate need. Even during the pandemic, we've carried on our critical work, transforming the lives of more than 13.8 million people. We've been quenching thirsts, protecting the vulnerable, building livelihoods, and educating bright young minds. This is all because of you, Alhamdulillah. And we believe in the words of the Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessings be upon him, who said, the likeness of the believers in regard to mutual love, mercy, and kindness is that of one body. When any part aches, the whole body aches. So most of all, we need you to keep believing. Islamic Relief. We are one.